Hey, Ilyas, thank you for coming in. Just remarkable the news I'm hearing all the time. And we're going to get into this. It's been like a couple of years, I think, or something, or a year and a half since we did our last interview. But you've had so many amazing breakthroughs. And I just saw the LinkedIn post where you're now got the map up for universal quantum. Right? And you got the target. I thought, wow, that's really just so brave and forward thinking, and let's mine all of this today. So, thank you for coming in and sharing your insights with my audience.
Thank you. No, it's a pleasure. I remember well our last conversation. And of course, I've been following the way that you have assiduously looked at this whole sector. So it's a pleasure to be here.
So, Elias, maybe you can give a quick background for the audience who don't know it. How did Continuum come about, and then what's your current role with Continuum?
Yeah, so Quantinuum is the result of a merger which took place at the end of 2021, late 2021, although it was announced a little bit earlier. And the merger took place between Honeywell Quantum Solutions, which was really a division embedded within Honeywell Aerospace, and Cambridge Quantum Computing, which was a startup, which was a company that had spun out of the University of Cambridge in 2014. And the merger of this company, which was essentially a 50-50 merger, it was a 46% merger. So the shareholders of Honeywell Quantum Solutions or became at that time, together with $300 million that they invested, 54% shareholders, and Cambridge Quantum were approximately 46% shareholders. My role was that I was the founder of Cambridge Quantum Computing, and I was the inaugural CEO of Quantinuum. But then as we started to scale and grow, we have brought in a professional CEO, somebody who has seen scale in the tech industry for a wonderful man by the name of Raj, who was at Intel for 25 years. So Raj is now the CEO. I'm the deputy chairman, but I'm also my day job, as it were, Stephen, is I'm the chief product officer. So that's how the whole sort of thing hangs together. And very quickly, my background, I was prior to this the chairman. It's many years ago, but still very important. I was the chairman of the Stephen Hawking Foundation, and I was also the founder or one of the founders of Accelerate Cambridge, which today, of course, is seen as one of the most vibrant and successful of the accelerator programs for any university outside of the US.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a famous university of which you've been spinning out this amazing company. And then this formation with Honeywell into Quantinuum, as you mentioned, the founding CEO, but now the chief product officer and the vice chairman of the board of directors of Quantinuum. So Quantinuum is a quantum computing company. I would say it's the world's largest integrated quantum computing company. And so would you agree to that? I don't think anybody can compare, right?
No, we are. I mean, there are a number of metrics, and people are very careful sometimes, and not so careful, but we are careful. Our other shareholders include JP Morgan and Amgen and Mitsui, as well as Honeywell and GSR Corporation. And, we have prided ourselves over many years for being a very serious, careful with our words organization, where whatever we say, has come true. So yes, we are the largest in terms of whatever metric one may care to use. We are larger significantly than the in-house efforts of pretty much the majors. As you're aware, IBM has by the way, IBM is also a shareholder by way of disclosure, but IBM and Microsoft and Google have in-house programs on quantum, very, very successful, very, very interesting. So we're larger than them in manpower, et cetera, et cetera. But I think we're now also pretty much undisputedly the leader, in the sense that at any given time, a quantum computer can be measured by, a simple or a complex metrics. The simple one is how many circuits can you run, and we are by far the leader. And the other metric might be something like quantum volume, which is fast running out of utility because computers are growing very quickly. But on that measure, we are also the leading.
There's so many terms that you've been given out. So you talk about a circuit, you talk about quantum volume. There's this idea of noisy intermediate, quantum computing, right? So noisy intermediate scale quantum computing. And when I interviewed the vice president of Microsoft Quantum, Advanced Quantum, she talked about level 1, level 2, level 3. And that level 1 was really, sort of these physical qubits. And then level 2 was really being able to have logical qubits. So you're managing the noise so you can do more. And then level 3 will be scaling. And so I'd like your thoughts on this and your thoughts in terms of maybe you can define for the audience again, what is a qubit, but in really simple terms, what does it mean when you have this noisy intermediate scale quantum computing with these noisy ones, and what does it mean to have error correction and where you got the sort of intermediate level, and what does it mean when you can scale, and in that process, if you can define the quantum volume as well, but if you can keep it kind of bite-sized and simple for people, for the audience.
Yeah. I think quantum's been around long enough now for us not to have to give long university Caltech or California lectures on this thing. It's I remember in the early days of we were in fact the first startup in quantum, the first ever startup back at Cambridge, quantum computing. And I remember in the early days giving interviews and having conversations where half the conversation was a lecture on what it is. Yeah. So let's start with one quick point. I've just published on our website and also on LinkedIn a animation which is 2 minutes long at most, and it explains what a logical qubit is. So I just refer that to you so that you have that as a reference. It is pretty fun. But a qubit is nothing more than a physical thing. We get used to talking about bits and bytes in classical computing. So in my iPhone, I've got a phone that has X amount of bits or bytes as measured by the capacity for memory and the capacity to do things like watch YouTube and send messages. And all of these methodologies, all of these functions that happen in my iPhone or on my laptop or in a supercomputer are governed by something called a transistor, which is either on or off, on or off. So that's what happens in the classical world. In the quantum world, instead of a transistor, we have a physical thing. And the physical thing can be a single atom, which is incredible to think of, or a single electron, or a single photon. These are infinitesimal objects. They're far, far, far smaller than a transistor ever could be. But it just so happens that these physical things also have the equivalent of a on or an off. And these are things that can be measured. The world in which we live, Stephen, allows us the ability to measure these things. So a qubit is a quantum bit, and it's a transistor. It's not really a transistor, but it's the equivalent of. And therefore, you can compute with things when you know that once you look at them, they're either on or off. Now, logical qubits is a very interesting term, and it's a very appropriate term, because these things, these physical things, and let's just use an atom, a single atom, and these single atoms are prone to what people might call decoherence. In the world that they inhabit, well, you and I inhabit, but we don't notice decoherence. We're big macro things. But when you have a single quantum bit, atom, it could be swayed by a magnetic field or something. And so therefore, it's not always reliable. You might measure it and you might get garbage back as a result. You remember, it has to be either on or off. It has to be a 0 or a 1. But when you look at a number of these qubits and you have an ensemble, suddenly you can take care of the error that you might get if you're only looking at one. And error correction is a term, Stephen, that we've had in classical compute for 70 years or more. Our iPhones go wrong all the time. Single transistor might not be functioning properly, but we don't notice it because error correction in classical compute is well perfected. So in quantum computing, our ability to correct for errors, error correction, is the result of all of that is something called a logical qubit, which is a concatenation, a collection of qubits that taken together will be fault tolerant, i.e. they can do operations. Now, there's many different varieties of this, which I won't go into here, but a logical qubit, therefore, is one that is not prone to error because it is the result of putting together many qubits. And then lastly, just in terms of the the different metrics of how powerful a computer is, when this whole field started, people were really focused on how many qubits one might have. It was very misleading because not all qubits are created equal. I might need 1 million qubits just to do a mathematical algorithm, whereas you might only need 12. So not all qubits are equal. And therefore, IBM came up with something called quantum volume, which is very hard to cheat about and is very, very straightforward. It is a number of things that can be reviewed. You need a supercomputer typically to review. But by reviewing the operations of your quantum computer, you can say, that quantum computer has a quantum volume of X or Y. And this meant that if I said, I've got 1 million qubits, and you said I've got 10, everybody who's listening might think, oh my God, the 1 million qubits are great. Well, of course, they're not. Quantum volume was a good measure. Now, that measure, unfortunately, is beginning to run out of capacity. Why? Because the classical supercomputers that we have are now slowly, at least in our case, running out of the capability to measure quantum volume. I'll give you an example, a real number. Our quantum volume at Quantinuum, our computers, are measured at over 2 million. The nearest competitor that I'm aware of is 512. So 2 million versus 512. So in our case, quantum volume is getting to the stage where it's no longer feasible to accurately measure or appropriately measure. And there will be other measures, just like the semiconductor industry was many, many years ago. We came up with different ways of comparing semiconductors. And in the case of quantum computing, I suspect that we're not that far away. Perhaps people will start talking about logical qubits, or they might say gate depths, circuit depths. How many circuits can you run without there being an error? So these are the things that are emerging.
So really, really quite fascinating. And so as you indicated, in the old classical systems, you really had the sort of like the equivalent of switches, right? On and off, and transistor switches. So maybe an analogy would be, you could have a row of 8 lights, and you could switch one light on and one light off, and another one on and off. You had a bunch of them, let's say 8 of them, and a series of ons and offs that could represent a piece of information. And the manipulation of those on and offs can then get you to do math calculations and things like that. And by stringing them together, you could do the things that we see happen in our phones and so on. But then you're indicating, my read of what you're indicating in these quantum bits are different because they're at a really tiny scale. Like you said, it could be a photon, an atom. And when you're working at that scale, then it unlocks a lot of capabilities. You also said that they can have different kind of states, right? And in fact, on and off, but maybe even any range between those zones and blobs, I guess. That's a possibility. Is my understanding correct?
Yes, almost. It is, to all practical purposes, correct. The only thing I would say is I think that, and again, quantum computers will soon be the subject of everyday conversation, and these mysteries will disappear. I have a car. I have no idea how it works. It's an advanced car, but I use it. So I think, we will very quickly get there with quantum computers as well. People will be more interested in what can you do with them as opposed to how they can work. But just on the topic of how they work, I would say two things to you. Number one, the state of the bit, the qubit, the equivalent of whether it's on or off, is always, once it's measured, on or off, 0 or 1, up or down, left or right. It's always one of two states. We as human beings, we as the world, as it were, the universe, when we take a peek, when we measure something, as you said, the analogy of lights, we can see whether a light is on or off. When we look at a qubit, let's call it an individual atom, it will always be either up or down. We will never observe it in some intermediate state. That is not possible. However, and these are the laws of physics, and quantum mechanics has been around for a very long time, the magic happens in between. You're absolutely right. In the quantum mechanical world, and the difference between a classical computer and a quantum computer, and this is it, this is the sort of the punchline, as it were, the bottom line. A classical computer works and lives according to the laws of the universe at a macro level, where, for example, gravity works like this, right? So that thing fell because of gravity. At the quantum mechanical level, the laws of the universe are different. So the reason why we are excited, the world is excited about quantum computers, is there are certain things, not everything, there are certain things that a quantum computer can do that a classical computer could never do. And one of the reasons for that capability is what you said, is that a quantum state covers an entirety of many, many different possible outcomes, when a transistor is always on or off, whether you're looking or not. You could look at it, as with the light, and it's on or it's off, and you could turn away and look again, and it will still be on or off. But until you measure a qubit, it does occupy this rather mysterious superposition that you've commented on. But Stephen, the point at which we measure, the point at which we try and get an answer, so we might say 2 plus 2 equals, and we won't know the answer until we look at it, we measure it, because that's an algorithm, and the algorithm's outcome needs to be measured in your phone. You get it on your screen. Like if you tap in 2 plus 2, you'll get on your screen an answer. That's the equivalent of you measuring. So that at that point, a qubit is always either on or off. I just want to clarify that. But at that point, it has the magic of having been in superposition before.
Yeah, so that superposition, this kind of ability to have any kind of state when it's not being observed, allows you to have amazing computational kind of capabilities, right? Beyond unimaginable in some ways. And then the fact that they can work in tandem, in essence, like in parallel, to this magic of entanglement, then it gives you again this unimaginable way of handling types of complexity. It just isn't possible in a classical computer. Is my understanding correct?
100%. So the reason why, absolutely, that one you've absolutely nailed. That's a 10 out of 10, Stephen. So the way to maybe think about this in a slightly more simplistic way, without any arm waving and without any mystery, is that there are three things that happen in quantum mechanics which don't happen, or at least are not observably so, in the world that you and I inhabit. One is this superposition, i.e. the ability to be in all states at the same time until measured. The other is this thing called decoherence, where interference, not decoherence, where famously there's this double slit experiment where a single photon or many photons can act in a wave-like manner. Think of the waves of an ocean, or can be like a ping pong ball, i.e., a physical solid thing that bounces off walls and things. It can be both at the same time. And that means that if it's a wave-like function, they can interfere with each other. So when two waves are in sync, they power each other, they go higher or lower, as opposed to if they're not in sync, they can clash with each other and they may then end up being neither high nor low. So this interference is something to do with probabilities. And then lastly, you're absolutely right, this non-local connection. So you could have two things, two photons, two atoms, very, very far apart. But if something happens to one, then the other automatically can be seen as possessing information that you otherwise wouldn't know because they're not connected. So it's a bit like if you and I were, I don't know, if I tossed a coin and it was heads and you were on, the moon, then the coin that you open up would be heads without you even doing anything, without knowing that I've even tossed the coin and you just being told. So this spooky, Einstein called it spooky, this spooky action at a distance is what we call non-locality. So the non-locality, the quality of non-locality, the quality of interference or duality, wave-particle duality, and the superposition, these three laws of quantum physics are the reason why quantum information theory opens up things that can't be done classically.
And that's the fascination and the progress. And what's happened is that you have these physical qubits, and then with what you've done at Continuum is you've been able to find ways of doing error correction in a way that was dramatic. You had a major announcement in April with Microsoft. Can you describe that? And then I would say about a week later, you had another announcement about 3/9 fidelity, and somewhere between 3/9 and 4/9 fidelity is what you're indicating. And once you get to that, let's say 4/9, then you get to practicality, right? So, back in 2018, Google came out with an announcement about really it was kind of like a toy problem, wasn't a real problem. They were just kind of proving or trying to prove that quantum computers could do something that classical computers couldn't do. And yet IBM said, shortly after, wow, we could actually do a quantum algorithm on a supercomputer that can actually mimic what you're saying that a quantum computer can do. So you got these physical things, qubits, they're error prone, and you can't do anything because they decohere, they kind of fall apart. Can't do anything with them. You then create these logical qubits where you've got error correction, so you can do something with them. And so can you talk about this major breakthrough you had with Microsoft in April, and then your announcement shortly after about 3/4/9 fidelity, and then after you finish that, then I want to go to this recent announcement about this roadmap of a universal quantum and what does that mean? But let's break it up into pieces, right? So first of all, the big announcement with Microsoft. Can you talk about that?
Yes. So in April of this year, the culmination of many things resulted in a logical qubit being created. In fact, 4 of them were created. And those 4 logical qubits met certain standards that Microsoft have long held to be important. And I think we can all agree that Microsoft are serious and credible. And so it's not just us who have this opinion, but these logical qubits were described as reliable. Now, the comment at the time by Microsoft, which we agree with, is that we therefore have left a period of time when we were having these, all of us, the world, not just Quantinuum, but Microsoft, Continuum, etc., lived in a world where the computers that were quantum in nature were really experimental and they were really fantastically interesting, but they were not quote unquote reliable. So there was a passing of the torch from one era to the next. And that capability in our machine is something that is not trivial and could only come about because of many different qualities that our processor has. One of those is the so-called 2-qubit gate fidelity. Now, 2-qubit gate fidelities are another thing that can't be cheated on. You either do or you don't have a particular gate fidelity. So that's the number of times you can do things without it collapsing or decohering or giving you an error in a readout. And whilst you and I might have a lab and we might spend lots of money in a lab having a couple of qubits that might have certain measured fidelities, it's very different taking that out and putting it in the commercial world and running, in fact, a third party running experiments without you constantly saying, wait, don't do yet, give me a minute, Yeah. And that is what Microsoft demonstrated, that in a commercial, robust, reliable system, these logical qubits could be created. There were other qualities that we have apart from fidelity, such as mid-circuit measurement. These are the sorts of things that simply aren't available in other quantum computers. So that was the development in April, and at the time, Microsoft and we knew that this was going to continue to advance. And one of the reasons is that, of course, progress doesn't stand still.
Yeah, in fact, it's interesting. They even came out with a number. They were saying that it's like 800 times better from an error correction standpoint than anything else in the marketplace. And they said it was a significant breakthrough. Would you agree with that?
Yes, it was. First of all, this is something which we at Continuum are known for. Everything we say, we publish, and we publish all of the details and not some of the details. So we don't do hero shots. And secondly, when we publish with partners, that information is therefore validated. In the case of some of the work, historically, we've validated with ORNL, Oak Ridge National Labs, with Caltech, with Harvard, with Microsoft. So in all these things that we're talking about now, or soon we'll talk about, there is no reliance on simply Continuum saying, hey, trust us, this is kind of, it's okay, what we're telling you. So the numbers and the statistics that were quoted were unbelievably important, and they marked a real milestone, and this is something that will be remembered. I rather suspect, however, that because of the close proximity of what happened in April and what we announced today, that in a few years' time, perhaps in a decade's time, what we just announced last week, or this week rather, will probably be the thing that everybody remembers as opposed to April, although April was very important.
And then shortly after the announcement of a major breakthrough, right, in logical qubits, like real logical qubits, where you have enough stability where you could do something. Then there was an announcement with a 99.9, the 3 nines fidelities, and you talked about 3 nines, maybe going to 4 nines. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah. So and I'll also maybe explain what we therefore were able to do with that, in addition to what we did with Microsoft. So I think I'm going to now say for 25 years or more, there has been a widely accepted rule of thumb that says in order for quantum computers to become useful, and not just experimental, then you need gate fidelities that are expressed as 3 nines. So 999, 99.9% of the time, you will not have an error. Now, this is obviously something which, when we talk about computation, we are talking about large scales. So you're never going to be running a computer for only 100 shots or 200 shots. Shots means you submit a circuit and you get back a result. And in the case of a quantum computer, something that has 999, that means that for 99.9% of the time, it will not return an error. This was seen as a benchmark. And at one stage, Stephen, this would have been a summit that somebody would have said, oh my God, I'm never going to get there. So achieving that was very important. And one of the reasons it's important is that there are many modalities which probably won't get to 999 for a very long time. So when they try to create these logical qubits, they're going to need hundreds, if not thousands or millions of physical qubits in order to create this logical qubit. It's not quite a one-to-one correlation because there are other qualities of the qubit that are required, not just the gate fidelities, not just 2 qubit gate fidelities or error rates, but this is a big benchmark. And what we then did as a way of showing, one was the experiment with Microsoft where we only needed 4 or 5 or 6 qubits in order to create a logical qubit, which, by the way, is stunning. Up until now, people would typically say, oh, well, you need 1,000 or 100. I think that Google did a very nice experiment 2 weeks ago where they used 100 qubits to create a single logical, although in that case, they didn't do any gate operations that I'm aware of. But it's still a very nice experiment. And still very, 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 very far away from what we've done, but nice progress. What also happened is that we then reran something called random circuit sampling. This is an experiment that Google had done, I think in 2020 or 2019. And at the time, they had claimed quantum supremacy, meaning that this is something that can't be done by a classical supercomputer. And as you've pointed out, some people did that experiment with a classical computer and said, well, actually, no, we can do it. In that case, as you mentioned, it was IBM, but IBM also earlier this year claimed supremacy with something they've done. And then somebody with a Commodore 64 turned around and said, I can do it as well. So this is part of the course. It's not that IBM were misleading or Google were misleading, but at the time, that's what they thought was possible. So what we've done is 200 times better than, more robust, I should say, than the Google experiment. There's a paper out on this. And this time, it's been a few months now, nobody's been able to replicate it. And the reason nobody has is that it truly cannot be done classically. There's no supercomputer that can do this. Now, does it have a practical advantage? Benchmarking cross entropy or random circuit sampling does have a practical use, and that would be in generating degrees of randomness that are should we say, replicable, and which therefore could be used in cryptography. There are many ways of doing this using a quantum computer, but it would not surprise me if in the future cross-entropy benchmarking and random circuit sampling becomes certifiable, and so therefore certified random circuits, certified by some supercomputer, might find some use case in cybersecurity. So I wouldn't really just designate this as a playground experiment, a toy experiment. There is some practical usage, and Google, of course, are much more emphatic than I. They have a statement and a blog post and details where they truly believe that something like this can be used in cryptography, and I tend to agree with them.
So you've got 99.9 fidelity, and you're heading towards 99.99. Is that going to happen within 18 months, would you say, or 2 years, something like that?
Well, we routinely get that and better in two different instances, and let me just clarify that. So we do have test beds. We have these different generations of computers working all the time, and we will quite often get results that are better than simply 3 nines. So 9995, 9998 or something, even better sometimes. We don't proclaim those. I mean, many of our competitors will do that, but we are of the view that testbed results are not commercial. And we're past the stage now in 2024 when, we should be shouting about these things. There was some company that announced a span, which is another measure of fidelity, which had been done on a testbed, and it's frankly, in our view, irrelevant. What matters is what is available commercially. Now, the second point, which I think, Stephen, is very important, is that using logical qubits, using error correction, I should say, to achieve logical qubits, we have surpassed 3 nines already. So in the announcement that has been made by Microsoft, the one that was made this week, as well as the one that was made earlier, using error correcting methodologies, we can take something that started with 3 nines and have something that has 4 nines and 5 nines and 6 nines. So this ability to create logical qubits that have got a better quality has already been displayed. So all of this is based on where you start, and the starting point of having 3 nines is critically important. Because if you start lower, if you start at 9989 or 99, I don't know, 89999, these are still orders of magnitude less than you need for that threshold.
It's really, really quite fascinating. And really, congratulations to the remarkable announcements that your company is just constantly making, and really making people sort of pay it a lot of attention. So now, my mind comes to like cold matter physics, maybe applications in that area. There's this quantum Monte Carlo integration, quantum chemistry, quantum biology, logistics optimization, things like that, portfolio optimization, in that sort of litany of things that I mentioned. Where do you see niche applications where companies are going to start using it, even though it may be a little bit messy, it may not be perfect, but they'll start using it?
Yeah, so I think that this is where maybe caution is called for. And Stephen, now maybe in English we have this terminology. I'm speaking against my own book. It's not terminology. When people who are saying something that wasn't necessarily in favor of their own cause. But I do think that we are on a journey, and we at Quantinuum are not saying that quantum computers are going to be commercially useful today or even tomorrow or even next year. And we are probably a few years away from real application, apart from 1 or 2 niche areas. And I think it's really important to make that point. In fact, one of the reasons that we are so trusted and we are the leading is that when we say we're going to do something, we have always done it. So we put a new roadmap out, and you haven't asked me about that yet, and you will, but we can now reliably align the capability of a machine with an outcome. So that's my first point. My second very quick point is I like very much the language that has been used by Microsoft, which is that we are in a period now where quantum computers will help with scientific discovery, which is, of course, where mankind, as long as there has been mankind, has led to progress. So whether it was fire or the wheel, somebody somewhere may have seen a spark, and that then led to a fire. So I very much agree with that. I also think that what has changed, and this is perhaps where you're going with this, I can't read your mind, just like I can't read the inside of a qubit until we measure it. We think very strongly that generative AI, regardless of whether you are religiously doctrinaire, either way, some people say that this is the best thing ever, and others say it's all a sham. Regardless of all of that, the practical outcome of aligning a reliable quantum computer with a powerful AI system and high performance compute, that combination, which we refer to as a quantum supercomputer, is very close now to the point where we really will be solving some of the world's most important problems. And that's what's exciting. On its own, a quantum computer may be a few years away from solving problems, but now suddenly we have this alliance, this integration. And that's why I think this week's announcement is just so exciting. And the application to, for example, high temperature superconductivity, or to condensed matter physics more generally, hydrogen physics, for example, simulating what's happening with fundamental matter, or looking at optimization, or looking also at computational biology and drug discovery. It is these things that now suddenly become available, more easily conceivably available than would have been the case if we were only looking at quantum. That's the point.
I mean, that's fascinating. I interviewed the head of the Quantum Institute in the Department of Energy, and I believe he's associated with Oak Ridge as well. And just really a lot of excitement about the hybrid systems, right? Which is what you're talking about, which is there's exascale supercomputing or supercomputing in the cloud in some fashion, and then combining that with quantum capabilities. It could be quantum inspired, but also quantum as the hardware gets better and better. And then also combining that in some way with some of the advances in AI machine learning in this hybrid environment. And Microsoft came out with an announcement early this year with their Microsoft Azure quantum elements, where they went through 32 million battery candidates, and they actually found a novel material. They actually built it. It works. And that's sort of this idea. Think of all of these as a hybrid system working to solve major practical problems. And but it's interesting, in my earlier interview several years ago with the head of these programs with the Department of Energy and Oak Ridge was mentioning the same thing. And now it's becoming much more reality. It just came out with a big announcement. So let's talk about that. Can you tell the audience about this big announcement? And then, of course, Microsoft is making similar kinds of announcements, and just came out, and it's in September. And I want to bring this up because I've got this keynote coming up, but actually next week. It's a moonshot keynote, but it's to CEOs and investors, and you're going to be a highlight because you got this announcement. So it's like fresh news. So can you talk about this really exciting math that you produced, and what you believe the possibilities are, right? So,
well, thank you, and I think on this occasion, I really am struggling for the right words, because we have been so careful in the past about not letting ourselves get carried away or others get carried away. There's one thing being excited, but there's another being realistic, as you know. We're operating in a world where we have stakeholders and customers who rely upon us, so we have to be very careful. So what was so exciting about this summer is that 3 or 4 things came together. So what I'll do, Stephen, I'll mention the 3 things first, or 4, then I'll pause, and then you can tell me which one you want to go down. The most recent thing, which is the culmination of everything, so I'll start with that, is that for the first time now, the world has a detailed and credible plan towards fault-tolerant universal quantum computers prior to the end of this decade. This has never been available before. We've had different organizations either saying something aspirational but with no detail. Like people say, "Oh, well, we'll get there." Estimates, but no detail about the statistics, about the metrics, about the stepping stones. We now are at a stage where, because of everything that already exists, because we already do all of these things, when we say we're going to get to X stage, X means universal quantum, fault-tolerant quantum computers, people can now make a judgment saying, well, you're already here. It's a bit like climbing K2. So you're already here, so you're no longer in the valley looking at base camp. K2 base camp is 5,000 meters. Oh, actually, you're not even at base camp. You're beyond base camp. So people can make those judgments. And we have full details. What is it that system will possess? So that's the roadmap that we published yesterday, the day before yesterday. No, I'm sorry. It was yesterday. It was yesterday. It was yesterday. Today's Wednesday, so it was on Tuesday. Earlier in summer, we also announced this remarkable partnership with the government of Singapore, where we will be using quantum computers in hybrid systems to do something which is so important for mankind. And this is to do with computational biology. There's a saying, I didn't come up with this, but if the 19th century was the century of chemistry and mechanical engineering, and the 20th century was the century of physics and electronics, then the 21st century is biology and gene editing and gene therapy. And this has such amazing impact that if we just stop for a moment and think about it, all else disappears. It doesn't matter whether we can optimize option trading, or it doesn't matter whether we've got great cybersecurity. It doesn't matter whether we are producing better motor cars, faster motor cars, or even going to the moon. None of this matters, because human beings, for as long as we have been human, are stuck in a paradigm that is controlled by our DNA and the way it works, firing up RNA. And we have, between all of us, somewhere between 19,000 and 20,000 genes, and those govern everything, literally everything. And so that announcement was a separate issue. And then the third issue, which I think you've just referred to obliquely, is that people with powerful AI systems have acknowledged now that those systems will be able to solve many of these problems in combination with a quantum computer. And Microsoft have gone so far as to say, if we have 100 logical qubits, then we will be able to solve these problems. Now, guess what? And I'll pause afterwards. Yeah. We are telling the world that we will be more than halfway there this time next year. This time next year. Then we're saying that we probably will have 100 logical qubits the year after. In fact, we're going one step further, and we published a roadmap with the vital statistics of the machine that will have that. And then we have said in 2029, we will have Continuum's Apollo, where the machine is called Apollo, which will have thousands of qubits and hundreds of logical qubits. And we have furthermore published the error rates, or the gate fidelities, if you like, that are accompanying those achievements. Now, that accumulation, which let's call it a roadmap or a path, is a tipping point.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a tipping point, and it definitely puts out a stake in the ground, right? And puts a stake in the ground for everybody in the world to take a look at. And it's interesting, the UN is declaring next year the year of quantum. So,
Well,
and continue.
Stephen, my expectation is that all of these things that we've said are based on our understanding at the moment. But if you, what is the lesson of the last 4 or 5 years? The lesson of the last 4 or 5 years is that advances in integrated devices, advances in software, advances in error correction, advances in hardware, these things mean that perhaps for the first time now, instead of being overly optimistic about what can be achieved, we're probably going to be undershooting. Because in the past, these things had never been done. We didn't have the logical qubits that we've been talking about, or the quality of the physical qubits. So I do think that in error correction itself, in that field, advances will push us further and further.
Yeah, and then not to mention there's all these other kind of parallel research areas like topological, quantum computing, new kinds of ways of doing things. And at any one moment when you scan the literature, there's like people say that there are hints of breakthroughs everywhere, right? And
Well, let me give you. So we've not talked about this publicly. So let me give you something. I don't know whether it'll be beneficial for your audience, but just for you, maybe a little bit of an inside peek for something that's a bit exclusive. So we're working on something called the Genon, Genon, which is a particular species of error correcting methodology. I personally, let's just talk about me rather than Continuum. I think that that is going to supercharge our work just in the coming year. We don't take that into account at the moment, but our machine in 2026 will fully benefit from this. The machine already exists in testbed form, actually more than testbed form. And so you are so right to say what you've said, because we are now seeing the benefits of this. Remember, just since 2020, we have received over $600 million in investment. And what we're seeing today are the benefits of that investment. This didn't happen overnight. There's no magic involved here. This was the application in a maniacally purist fashion. And I look back at, let's go back to 2017, 2018. There were so many companies aspiring to do what we do. And I'm afraid the vast majority of them are compromised. They didn't either have enough money or enough people. And then now you look at what they say, they've compromised. They're no longer purist. We are entirely maniacally focused on one thing, and we do that well.
yeah, and without a doubt, you're doing it very, very well. So just a remarkable kind of journey that you've been on, but also, your ecosystem and your colleagues. And I just, I smile every time I see a post or I see an announcement from your group, because I think, wow, that's just remarkable. And it's in real time. It's like, it reminds me when I was brought in by a group of CEOs back in 2015 to help them look 10 years into the future. And I indicated at that time they need to look at quantum science. And people were saying 2100, 2200, if ever. And that's not the conversation anymore. And particularly with what you're doing, that is definitely not the conversation, right? You put a stake in the ground, people can aspire, and as you're in the case with you, you're doing more than aspire for that. You're actually executing to meet those goals, right? And just a remarkable journey. And Ilyas, I always enjoy these conversations with you. And Congratulations on all of this remarkable journey. And if there were maybe one final question, it's kind of a compound question. What sort of recommendations would you want to leave the audience, or questions would you want to leave the audience?
Well, I think maybe a soundbite on both. Thank you for asking. I would recommend that people start thinking about the impact of quantum computers together with large language model type generative AI systems and obviously high performance compute clusters in the context of computational biology. It is a little bit of a passion of mine. What could be more important? I mean, we talk in this world about so many things, but surely, you know, we all have families, we all have people we love, we all have our own ailments, and if we, it's not about living forever, it's about living longer and living with dignity, so that we're no longer tackling the symptoms of aging, but we've tackled the root cause. And so things like oncologies and various oncologies, as well as Alzheimer's and senility and diabetes and other sort of related illnesses that are immune deficiencies. These are now really within reach. I would encourage people to think about that. And of course, the economic value of that is that it's incomparable. Nothing comes close. Nothing comes close. I mean, so that's one. And then the other thing, so that's the thing to contemplate. And the question to ask, I think, would be, where should my organization now start thinking about the impact of quantum, either with my competitors or in my own processes? And I think it's now time to start doing that. It may have been too early last year or the year before, but it's now time to start doing that and start experimenting, maybe hiring somebody or a small team to do this, because I do encourage people not to be only focused on classical AI. Think of AI as being powered by many different types of compute. So you can still be focused on AI, but now start thinking about how quantum will impact. And I think that's a good conversation to be elevated into the boardroom.
You know, that's kind of really, really fascinating. Great advice, right? You can't ignore it. You definitely have to plan for this. So just maybe one last comment, and that is, how many generations are you concurrently working on at the same time of these different platforms?
I think so Stephen, I think that's probably the first time on this interview you've asked me a question that I'm gracefully and respectfully going to step back from, because I do have, as you know, a policy of not giving bullshit answers or making things up. And on this one, I would be speculating beyond my reach, and I have many thoughts on the topic. Maybe what I would say is that there is now a fairway. You know, if you're a golfing player, I'm a very bad golfer, but there's now a fairway emerging. And I think that one of the benefits of this will be that we can start adopting language that crosses different modalities, different barriers, different functions. So the questions we might start to ask are not the how, but the what. What is it that a code LLM will do? So not a language model, but a code model. How about theorem proving? How about the impact on energy consumption and the building of facilities such as data centers, and how can we accommodate quantum there? I think those are the kind of things that I'm not answering your question, I know, but I would suggest that maybe that's a better area at the moment, because you could ask that question that you've asked of me for 50 people, and then the ball's not going to land in the fairway. There'll be 40 different fairways.
Again, thank you for coming in and sharing so many of your insights. You're definitely transforming society in a fundamental way for the good. So, and you're making and continue to make significant contributions to history. So thank you for sharing so many of your insights with my audience.
No, thank you, Stephen, for having me. Enjoy it, and good luck with everything you're doing as well.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.